Hello my friends. Inside the Museum of Torture, which is the first of its kind in the Middle East and Africa, and perhaps the largest in the world. It contains the most torture methods. It includes various groups of torture tools that people have used with the aim of extracting confessions from people or to kill those who disagree with them, on top of which, of course, are the carabiners for flogging bodies, and cleavers for cutting hands, feet, cauterizing and burning tools. In this video, we monitor the worst torture tools around the world, which were gathered in Egypt through the Museum of Torture. The virgin, or virgin, was the first torture instrument that you could see as soon as you entered the gate of hell, as its owner liked to call it. It was the instrument that was used by the Inquisition in medieval Europe, and its purpose was not torture, as much as its goal was death through torture and humiliation before death, as it was a box filled with thick, sharp nails that penetrate every part of the human body to be killed. Through the virgin, they were deliberately killing the human being with panic. Dr. Muhammad said with resentment, as he told me that they were not satisfied with killing the human being, but rather they were leaving the dead body inside the machine until it turned into a skeleton, and when they wanted to kill another person, they would remove the skeleton in his presence, to enjoy his shock. Nervousness before his death. Next to the virgin, there is a variety of whipping tools, and perhaps the most famous of them for us is the whip, which we saw embodied in the movie, The Passion of the Christ. We may remember the scene of the executioners lowering the whip on the back of the artist, James Caviezel, and then removing it from him, as in the past they used the claws of lions. At the ends of the whips were flogged to dismember the body, and next to that group of whips was placed a symbol for killing Muslims, which was the image of the person who burned the Quran after the fall of Andalusia. The executioner studies every part of the body of men and women, to innovate in how to torture them. He said this as he pointed to a painting showing the method and stages of torturing women in the detention centers of the Inquisition, saying that the priests would rape her first, before she was placed on the Spanish donkey, which is it was a sharp-angled wooden block, on which they used to sit the woman, and they tied iron weights to her feet, to pull her down, and her body was split from the bottom to the rib cage. The others either cut their breasts with thick scissors to die of nervous shock, or they laid them on a slanted bed and poured boiling oil into their mouths. Or molten lead or quicklime, which is death coupled with lethal torture. Next to the torture painting there is a group of Inquisition chairs, one of which is full of nails. They would light a fire until those nails burned, then they would bring the woman stripped of her clothes and sit her on it. The nails would be stuck in her body and they would leave them to dry. Then they would take her off the chair, and the other would be found in his back. 3 swords, and in the seat there is a rotating knife that spreads the person sitting on it, and next to them is a picture showing the entire scene. This machine fed the dogs with human intestines. He said as he pointed to a machine in the middle of which was a group of rotating knives, facing the abdominal area to tear the intestines. They were flying left and right, and the dogs were feeding on these intestines. The smell of blood, barbecue, and rot rose to prick the noses, and the sound of screams deafened the ears. This is what I felt, in this depressing atmosphere. The severed heads and torn limbs that fill the rooms of the museum, although they are mere figures, once you see them, you feel as if they are crying out for help and screaming for mercy. Imagine being standing and having the worms of the dead fall on you. These iron cages, suspended from the ceiling, used to imprison people until death, and at that time they would leave them to decompose in them, and the worms would fall from them on the heads of those who were with them in the cell. In the meantime, we arrived at the impalement room, which we did not know in our history except when the French campaign used it to kill Suleiman al-Halabi, in the year 1800. This method has 2 entrances for the woman and 1 entrance for the man, and it has 2 exits, from the mouth, where he dies at the same moment, and in this case, the person is lucky, or it comes out of the right shoulder, and at that time he does not die at the same moment, unless he takes a drink of water, so they were extremely cruel, depriving him of water to remain for long hours in pain, And he may continue to live in that position for 2 full days, on the side of the room. I put together a model of the impaled Suleiman al-Halabi, hanging heads and severed limbs, clamps of all kinds, for the hand and neck, and another tripartite that bound the neck, hands and feet and tiles and saws. The scarf, to torture children. They designated the scarf for little angels, which indicates the barbarism of them. It is a wooden bed on which young boys and girls are tied, and in the middle of it is a set of thick nails, which do nothing but tear out the flesh from their backs. The shovel is a pole to which a person is tied, and behind his neck is a thick nail that rotates slowly until it penetrates the neck from the back to the front. Next to it is the coffin of the Inquisition, full of nails, from which the executioners would drag men and women and throw them inside it, pressing them to penetrate their cells and tear them apart. Draw a palm tree on the wall, and bring me dates, is a famous saying inside most of the world's prisons, and it is considered an insult to the prisoner. However, in the Inquisition, they used to place a dummy horse for them and ask the prisoner to ride it and run quickly. Catherine's wheel, which is 2 large rotating wheels, to which they would lead the person and tie him to the top of one of them. As soon as the 2 wheels rotated, the head would separate, and then his body would fly into small pieces, as if they were preparing minced meat as food for dogs, and so it was called the crushing wheel. The historian allocated one of the torture rooms in Iran, in which the executioners would torture prisoners by raping their wives, daughters, sisters, and mothers in front of their eyes, then leaving them their underwear, and a bottle of alcohol next to them. Rape is not just for girls. There are men who are raped too. The man suffers psychologically from physical abuse like the woman. On the charge of breaking the hymen of Samara bint Salem Rayhan, next to it is another picture of a man named Maurice Al-Fransawi being punished for raping a boy. Suddenly I felt as if I was in Al-Hadra, and I recalled the tunes of "My sister is on her and my sister is on her, she has covered her legs, she has covered her feet." I thanked God that I am not the type of person who wears any gold coins. Without any introductions, as I retraced my steps in the torture museum, I found myself in the stronghold of Raya and Sakina, who were famous for killing women to steal them, and despite their cruelty and execution for the first time in the history of women in Egypt, they appeared more kind and compassionate than what I saw. Are you afraid of mice? Imagine being part of a mousetrap. Yes, I admit that I am afraid of mice when they pass by me, and I do not imagine myself being taken to a prison camp, and they placing a mousetrap on my stomach, and I believe that I will die from a nervous shock before the mice do their job. They do not content themselves with placing the mice inside the trap, but rather they place a marriage on top of it, with the aim of frightening the mice, so that they try to escape and find nothing but eating the intestines of the person fixed in the trap, so that they can hide inside his stomach. The Zionist entity had another wing, led by the Israeli cupboard, which is not used for killing, but rather to imprison people who wish to extract confessions from them. It is a narrow cupboard that can barely fit a skinny person, and therefore any person who spends several hours inside this cemetery is ready to confess to anything. Something to get rid of. Even goats used it for torture. This is what Dr. Abdul Wahab said sarcastically, and it is a method that he considered demonizing innovation. Who would imagine using goats to torture humans? The demonization of systematic torture made them use the scales of this peaceful creature's tongue, and his love for the citrus taste, so they would spray the bound feet are salted for food, so the goat smells it and continues to lick it until it reaches the bones of the body. The catapults. At the end of the museum you see a model of the first catapults, which threw our master Abraham into the fire, and the stone with which Cain killed Abel, and the guillotine for which the French Revolution became famous, and the drip torture machine, whose mission is to drip boiling water on the head of the bound person to reach the stage of hysteria. I hope you enjoyed this visit. If you liked the video, do not forget to subscribe and activate the bell to receive the next videos. If you have suggestions, do not hesitate to respond.